Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tango Banter. I am Yelizaveta, your host, and let's talk about how tango is a really sexy dance. At least that's what we portray it as, and that's what we see when we look up images of tango online. Some of my first images of tango that I remember seeing, or even some of the memories of what was really impactful in my first experiences of tango, the dancers that I saw on the dance floor and what I noticed. It's all this very sexy type of quality. And it is something that I grew up craving. My very first experience of the idea of this type of experience with another person, frequently of the opposite sex, and sharing an intimate experience on the dance floor while breathing each other's breath. I first was experiencing the draw towards that after seeing the movie Dirty Dancing. I don't know about you, but for me, that movie, I think sometimes is the reason why I became a tango dancer. Sometimes I even think that the story of the main character is my story. I lived through a very similar experience with dance and with relationships. And that scene of her, the main character, coming in for the first time and seeing people dancing and the way the sequence is shot. And then Patrick Swayze, of course, comes out and dances with her for the first time. And that scene, once I saw it, I knew I wanted it. I didn't know what it was that I was seeing. I just knew I wanted to be one of those people dancing. Now, the idea of sexiness is a very broad concept that definitely includes sexuality and sensuality. And this episode is particularly about sensuality, which is, I learned with time, different from sexuality. But when I first experienced the image of dancing through the film Dirty Dancing, and then my very first experiences of connection on the dance floor, at that point, I did not know the difference between the two concepts. It was all one. And I remember my very first experience on the dance floor that was really moving was actually not even in tango, but it was in the Bahamas as part of a 3-day cruise that I went on with my sister. Yes, it was one of those really cheesy carnival cruises. I was reluctant to agree to go on something so cliche, but my sister was paying. So I said yes. And at the time, I was married. So the second night of the cruise, we are on the island and we go in search of sexy time. We want to dance, we want to party, we want to flirt, you know. But at the time, I just was not even aware of what was possible. I had been married for years. I was very conservative. I was a nerd. I was in school working on my second master's. I worked almost full time. I was very religious. So I had no idea what this world was like. I had seen Dirty Dancing. It was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't something I even conceived of as being available to me So we end up on the island and we're going up and down the coast looking for a party. Nothing's happening. And I'm kind of relieved because I'm thinking, let's just go back to the ship. We'll go back early so I can do a little bit of studying because, like a total nerd, I brought my research materials and books on this cruise because I thought I was going to be actually working. My sister was like, no way. So we're on our way back to the ship, but we end up going back to the first bar that we went to maybe a couple of hours before. And lo and behold, there's this amazing party going on, and they are playing the best, the absolute best of the 90s. So we end up doing some shots and dancing. And as I'm dancing, I'm sort of having this out of body experience. Like there was all this energy pent up in me. And I just was like bursting with this drive to just sort of lose it on the dance floor. And I then see this really cute Russian guy who shows up, who was our waiter on the ship. And he was very tall. He was blonde. He had blue eyes. He was wearing a white shirt that was buttoned down just a little extra with some gold bling underneath that. And I remember skinny jeans and white pointy shoes. I mean, it was over the top. And we start dancing on the dance floor. And there's all this energy between us. And then we touch. And then, there's this moment. And then he kisses me on the dance floor. And I knew at that moment that my marriage was over. It was that profound. It was that profound. The sensuality part of it and the sexuality, the sexiness of the whole moment was so profound. It was such a shift in consciousness that I was completely altered within a song. I thought I had found my soulmate. And I know I'm not alone in saying that you have those experiences on the dance floor where you connect with someone so deeply that if you're new to it, the only way your mind can justify this kind of experience is to say, this is my soulmate. And of course, because for most of us, we don't have experience with that kind of intimacy outside of tango. Most of us have never been taught how to touch other people or what to do with complex feelings and emotions and how to react and what to say. So when we're thrown into this dance, we unleash a lot of this energy that's pent up, and it's sort of in its raw form. It's unformed. It doesn't have a definition yet. And I know for women like me, it was such a revelation that I was capable of feeling something like that. And from that moment on, I wanted nothing else but to feel that. And with the kind of mentality that I had at the time and the maturity level that I was at, it made me very vulnerable to some less than wholesome experiences in tango because I didn't quite see that difference. I didn't see that there might be a difference between experiencing sensuality versus sexuality. But it is the case that the two concepts are actually quite different. And in preparation for this, I looked up the definitions, and I found one definition of sensuality is the condition of being pleasing or fulfilling to the senses, which I really like that definition because it points to the idea that sensuality specifically deals with the pleasing of the senses. And sensuality might be sexual, but it doesn't have to be. It can be just the enjoyment of touch or just the enjoyment of listening to someone's voice, and that we can enter into a space of sensuality with many people, many different kinds of people. And it doesn't have to be in the context of tango. It might be in the context of jiu-jitsu, you know, where you still have a lot of body contact, but it's not necessarily open to crossing the boundary into sexuality the same way tango is. But, you know, sensuality is available and possible to experience in many contexts. Whereas sexuality, the definition of sexuality that I found was capacity for sexual feelings. So definitely you could see it as a continuum. Maybe sensuality is the sort of the foreplay of the process, and it develops eventually into a sexual type of energy. Or it can be experienced at completely separate, two very separate experiences altogether. But it is true that they are different. And for a long time, I did not understand the difference. Now, in a perfect world, we would all have the ability and the self-awareness and the care for others, for ourselves, to be sensitive to these distinctions and to automatically respect other people's boundaries and understand how to maneuver and how to protect and how to be honest and communicate our needs. Like, obviously, this is what I think we're all collectively striving for. We all are looking for our own path to having what we want and being empowered. But unfortunately, we can't necessarily expect that everybody's going to have our best interest in mind, or that everybody matches our values. And I think, especially when it comes to how men experience this aspect of tango, that sensual, sexual side of tango, and how women experience it, there can be a lot of conflict there. Because I think as women, we come in and we feel all of these feelings in our bodies, and suddenly we want to move how we want to move, and we get in touch with our bodies and in this new way. And it might not even cross our mind to be sexual. This is just how we're feeling. We're not necessarily looking to go to bed with anyone. We expect that we're going to have this wonderful time with someone, and after 12 minutes, we're going to walk off the floor and everything's going to be hunky-dory. But sometimes that's not what happens. Sometimes our partners either interpret something about us in a different way, so they start getting really excited, like the occasional sensation of something hard around the legs, you know, something that like that happens. Or sometimes suddenly they can't contain their turn on and they grab you and kiss you in the middle of a tanda, which has happened to me. And suddenly you feel like your boundary has been crossed. And of course, it feels violating, and most of the time we focus on how much we have not, how much respect we have not been given. Yeah, we blame the guy, or we blame men in general, and we feel like we've been taken advantage of. Sometimes we don't even stop it. We might think that that's just the price of doing business. That's just the price of dancing this dance. That it's supposed to be this way because the image of it is that, the woman giving herself to the man in a red dress as he bends her over and her leg wraps around him. Perhaps that is something that's ingrained in us. So we assume that unless we allow for something like that, we're not going to get the dance. And I definitely experienced that when I was in Buenos Aires, where most of my learning on this particular aspect of tango happened. Because the last time I was there, I was single, and the attention I got was so overwhelming. And then I was watching other women deal with that too. And it was difficult for me to accept that all of the men that I met in Buenos Aires, all of the people that I made friends with who were men, had an ulterior motive with me. And it was something I couldn't believe for a while, but I realized that one by one, as I drew a boundary and refused to go home with them, that they would stop dancing with me. And they try several times, and that's one of the features of Latin men, especially in Buenos Aires, is they don't give up. They'll keep trying. And it's understood, some people have described this as a natural process of things, that it is part of the game that they play, where the woman is going to say no several times and they keep pushing, and then eventually the woman gives in. So that's sort of understood, that they're going to keep coming after you until you say yes. So that was my experience coming into tango as a woman. And the sensuality that I felt at first drove me towards very toxic experiences and men taking advantage of me in certain ways. I ended up in an abusive relationship, and I didn't know it was abusive until after I was out of it. It's very hard to tell because you're being driven so much by the thirst, that feeling of like wanting that experience of sensuality that is bound up with sexuality, and they're sort of the same. In my experience, men tend to be very goal-oriented, very tunnel vision, and they tend to be either on or off when it comes to that energy, that sensual energy. Either it goes all the way into that realm of being very sexual, or it doesn't go there at all, and it's very mechanical. There are some dancers who have mastered the practice of entering fully with their senses and being very sensual within the dance, but then respectfully closing that space off afterwards and walking off the floor. And I believe I'm speaking for all women that those are the dancers we want to dance with the most, right? Dancers who will allow us to fully express ourselves, to connect with them deeply, and then let go and, move on with our lives. But there are certain men in tango that do not have that boundary. They do not understand the difference between the two. And a lot of times they will exploit the bursting of young energy that might happen for somebody who's coming into tango. So young women who are coming in who've never had these kinds of experiences, and here they are for the first time feeling their bodies and experiencing emotions that they've never had. And they're very vulnerable, and there are people who will take advantage of that. It is a fact. It's going to happen. I think many of us in the communities, we've been sort of denying how pervasive this is, how cyclical this is, how much this happens in communities. Every year, every couple of years, there are a handful of stories of young women coming in and being taken advantage of in some way, and then perhaps leaving tango, or there's some sort of a scandal breaks out. And for a while, there's a lot of drama, but for the most part, it goes away and things go on the way they used to. Whoever is the accused person a lot of times comes back to the scene and continues to do what they do. They continue to take advantage of other young women. A lot of times they are professional dancers. They are very good looking. And a common denominator among these group of dancers, group of men, is that they're very good dancers. They are exceptional. They're geniuses a lot of times. I call them Mozarts of tango. They're so good. And because they're so good, they get away with it. They literally get away with it in broad daylight. And as much as I want to fight this particular pattern, I have to acknowledge the fact that it won't change if I wait for the man to change. I have tried that. I don't know if you have. I've tried to change a man. I've tried to change several men. I have failed every time. When I was in the abusive relationship that I am describing or alluding to, there was a quote that turned something in my mind that changed my attitude towards myself, towards my situation, because I had been stuck in this relationship for several years, and it was obvious that it was very toxic and unhealthy. It turned physically abusive, and somehow I still allowed for it, and I still stayed with him. I still justified his actions and kept giving him another chance and thinking, oh, it's going to change. But then I read this quote, and I don't remember who said it, and I probably am not saying it exactly the way they said it. They said it better. Is that you will only allow another person to disrespect you as much as you disrespect yourself. Once they cross that threshold of disrespect that you yourself feel for yourself, you'll draw a line, and most of the time they'll be, they'll put down your foot and say, okay, that's it, that's enough. And when I read that and I considered what was actually happening in my life, it dawned on me that here I was waiting for this person to change, waiting for him to treat me the way I wanted to be treated, to respect, to acknowledge my feelings, to treat me well. And the truth of the matter was that I had such a low opinion of myself and my needs and my desires and my talent and my worth. I had put so much worth, so much meaning into our connection. I loved our dance so much. There was something so magical about our dance, the connection in the dance, the sensuality of it, that I was willing to be with this person and sustain the abuse. And it was on me. I did that. So eventually I realized I had to become someone different. I had to become a person that he would never abuse, that he wouldn't even think of abusing. I had to become that person myself. I couldn't wait for him to change. And I think that is true, broadly speaking, for us women in the community, that when we are coming in and we're feeling a lot of sensuality in our bodies, and we want to express that, we also, by the same token, need to learn how to create boundaries, how to demand the respect that we deserve. And I think what was very liberating to me after I gave up that relationship, and at the time that I gave it up, I thought, oh my God, I would never feel this kind of connection ever with anyone, because this connection was so special. And I hear women say that all the time. I've seen women tearing up, talking about that one dance they had with that one guy 2 years ago, and it was so special, and they never found anything like that afterwards. And I think it's just a belief. We're just believing that sensuality is something that can only happen in a certain context, with a man, for example, if we're a woman, and with a woman if you're a man. But the fact is that sensuality, the enjoyment of the senses, this feeling of expression and vivaciousness and aliveness, that can be sexy, sure, it can have that quality, it doesn't have to. That can be experienced with anyone, any kind of person. It could be, I sometimes experience it with women, sometimes I experience it with men. Men sometimes experience it with each other, but it's so much more rare, so much more rare. It's just not something that men are comfortable with in general, is to admit that they can feel sensuality with another man and openly own up to it and talk about it without getting insecure or kind of fearful of being considered gay or something. So it's understandable that men have their own path to figuring out their challenges, because maybe we're under impression that men know better, that they are supposed to know better. They're supposed to know our boundaries. They're supposed to understand our feelings. They're supposed to know and interpret our body language. And how could he not? How could he not read the fact that I was uncomfortable and he still went for it? Like, we expect them to be like women. You know, we expect them to have a broader perspective. You know, women's brains are very interconnected, right? We think of one thing in relation to many, 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 many other things. We see the ripple effect of actions, and that's our power, but it's also our Achilles heel, because sometimes it creates paralysis analysis, right? Because we see how things relate, and it's very hard for us to decide which way to go because we think 5 steps ahead in different directions. It's helped me on my journey to figuring these things out for myself to realize that a lot of my expectations for what I wanted from men, some of their behaviors that I was wanting to change, is because I wanted them to be like me. I wanted them to have a similar value system and a similar way that they were recognizing the repercussions and the consequences of their actions. But men just don't think that way. And I want to make sure I say this, that I'm not saying that men are wrong and women are right, or that women know better and men don't. I'm just saying that men and women are very different in the way we organize our value systems and how we proceed and how we act. And typically, very often men who end up doing something that is, let's just say, not appropriate behavior. They offend someone or they do something to cross a boundary and really hurt someone's feelings. A lot of times they'll say, I didn't mean to. I didn't do it on purpose. And I believe them. I believe that they don't mean to. But as we all know, for a lot of men, there's not a lot of maturity. A lot of men grew up not really understanding how to deal with their own emotions, how to behave properly, how to respect other people. So it's not necessarily the case with all men. I would say the majority of men in Tango are very respectful and have very high standards. And it's because of men like this that Tango continues. Because if all men behaved in the way that we're most of the time concerned with, I don't think Tango would last. I definitely wouldn't be in it. So we really have this expectation that men need to change, and that's what we demand from them, but they're not going to. It's going to continue happening. And I think if we want to be proactive, both individually and as a community, I think it's time that we let go of this narrative that we need to force a change out there and look to our own power and tools that we have available for ourselves to ensure that we are being respected, that we are getting what we want, that we have support, and that we can both have those experiences of deep sensuality and exploration of our creativity and feel safe and completely respected by our partners. That's the goal, I think, for all of us as people, as dancers, as human beings. So I know for most people who start Tango, and for most women who start Tango, especially very beautiful young women who might come into Tango and right away get a lot of attention, a lot of unwanted attention that they might not know how to deal with. At the same time, they're experiencing all of this blossoming in their bodies. So they have to negotiate these two things, like what is right and what is wrong, and what are my boundaries, and am I offended, and is this wrong? It's very difficult to see that when you're in it. It's much easier to see when you're standing on the sidelines. And, I remember a friend of mine who was in a very toxic relationship for years, and I had been waiting for her to just break up with this guy and move on. But something was there, that this magic, this virus that kept her bound to him. So she had spent 2 hours describing that's the most unbelievable behavior, the most toxic situations, and incredible emotional abuse and manipulation, and just awful. And after 2 hours, I said, so you broke up with him, right? And she just sort of looked at me and said nothing. And I was like, you're kidding me. You're still gonna continue? And at that moment, it dawned on me that this is so powerful. These are such powerful feelings and powerful emotions. And for a lot of women, it is inevitable that you're going to experience this, that there are going to be these very uncomfortable situations, and perhaps situations that make you want to leave Tango because they're so traumatizing. So what do we do? What do we do to develop our awareness, to grow as a community, to develop tools as women? I think I do like the idea of us just taking responsibility for ourselves and stop looking to change men, change their behavior. Instead, I propose that we focus on becoming the women that command respect, which is what I decided I was going to become. Once I put my foot down, it took a few years. Once I had that insight, it took some time for me. But I think the kind of revelations that I got from that experience and the wisdom that I gathered, it was worth going through the pain. Because now I find that the stories that I have gathered along the way and the really traumatic stuff I went through, it pales in comparison to the stories of other women. And this is kind of where I come back to that the only thing that helped me the most to make it here, to make it to this point where I can look back and have all of this wisdom and tools to deal with difficult emotions and situations, it was the support of other women, to have other women in my life. My best friend was watching me throughout that time of me being in this abusive relationship, and she was just sitting there on the sidelines going, all right, when is she gonna finally realize? And she didn't stop hanging out with me and she didn't judge me, but she was there, and she was there helping me to process my mistakes and learn and deal with the psychological growth that I was having to go through. So it really helps to be around other women. And if you find yourself in a situation that you're experiencing some of these negative consequences of sensuality, of this sexiness in Tango, and you end up the victim of particular behavior, it's so, so important that you don't just keep it to yourself, but that you talk to someone, that you have another woman or several women that can hear you out and can offer just a listening ear. And it doesn't have to go beyond that, but the isolation, I think that we women end up feeling, is the biggest obstacle to our successful growth. It's when we feel really alone, as if nothing like this ever happened to anyone else. And it's me, and I'm so stupid. How could I let this happen? It must be because I am insecure. It must be because I am, in some way I deserve this, or I'm not confident. And so we close up and we think that other women would judge us for disclosing this. But the reality is that it is so common. And even now, I'm watching the documentary series on HBO about Armie Hammer and his family, and apparently the systematic abuse of women that that family carried out throughout generations. And these women who came forth to talk about their relationship with Armie Hammer reveal details about the dynamics of those relationships and what happened and the sequence of events and the types of things that occurred. And so much of it, I was like, wow, I experienced that. This was my story too on some level. And it was once again such a light bulb moment to once again be reminded I'm not alone. This is so common. And it is a weight off my shoulders to know that there are other women out there dealing with these issues. And for those of you listening who have made it to the other side and you've had your share of toxicity in Tango and outside of Tango, and you've put your foot down and you've learned to draw your boundaries, or maybe you're the kind of woman who's always had boundaries. I've met these amazing, powerful women who say to me they've never had issues with men crossing their boundaries. And maybe you're like that. If that's the case, then what you can do is watch out for other women. You have something that is very valuable. I just remember that when I was trying to crawl my way out of this despicable situation, and that's just one of them, there were many, so much of my breakthrough and my success came from interacting with other women who were much, much wiser than me, who saw me in a different light and demanded that I have more respect for myself. And they were like little glimpses of something different, a place where I saw myself as more empowered. And it was such a key to have those women in my life, and I'm eternally grateful. So if you have some wisdom to share about these kinds of things, and you've lived through your own share of difficult exchanges and situations having to do with that sometimes powerful toxic energy of sensuality, then find a way to support other women as they go through their learning process. You know, a lot of times I've noticed we sort of have a judging eye towards young women who come on the scene, and we might think, oh, here's another one who's going to take up the leaders, and of course all the leaders want to dance with her because look how hot she is, and she's, you know, wearing a short skirt, so here we go, we're going to lose, you know, more leaders to this one. I know that's sometimes a judgment, but what else is true is that it's like a young little gazelle walking out into the savannah, and there's a bunch of lions hiding in the grass. And if we don't pay attention, that gazelle is going to be hunted down, you know? So I don't necessarily think there's any sort of action that you have to do, but just to encourage a different mindset towards other women so that we're not looking to change men, but we're looking to empower women, to let them know that they have support, that it's not okay if certain things happen, that they have tools and they have ways to communicate what happens, and they're not alone. I recently got an email from one of the listeners who's a dancer, a woman, and she described a very uncomfortable situation that happened some time ago with a professional dancer. And it was a very typical situation, very typical story that he acted very inappropriately on the dance floor, and she confronted him and confronted the organizer, and nothing happened. The organizer just brushed off her complaint. She ended up being very upset and very discouraged and actually leaving the scene for a while. And then some months later, she came back and just sort of ignored this dancer and tried to, not really pay any attention to him. But at that point, she reached out to me and let me know what happened. She let me know who it was because it was somebody I know. So with her permission, I actually shared this account within my private group for the women in my Chicas del Tango community. And I just put it out there as like, look, I just want you to know, here is this woman's account. It's just as a way of being aware that something like this is being said about this dancer. So be responsible, watch out for whatever, just kind of expect it. If you need to, if you're in his presence, just be informed. Some women were very thankful that I shared that information, and other women were very upset and kind of appalled because they couldn't believe that this dancer would do that. They were really close friends. He's an amazing person. No way. There's no way. This person's so nice. And are you sure? And maybe she's making it up. And why didn't she file a police report? And I was like, how interesting, right? How interesting that even among us, we might not trust a woman's account. Even as a woman, we might more likely go in the direction of, oh, the woman is making it up. That must be it. Although it's kind of like, why? I mean, and I guess I've heard of rumors of women who make up stories specifically to ruin somebody's career, that there are crazy women out there like that. I've never met those women, and I've only heard of maybe a couple of instances like that. For the most part, it's stories of men crossing boundaries and taking advantage of beautiful young women who are great dancers, who have beautiful bodies, who are very creative, and they're just expressing themselves. And the men feel that they are entitled to express their desire by biting their ear or their neck or grabbing their ass. That's gonna happen, okay? That's gonna happen. Now, after I posted this and we had a lively banter inside that group, a few days later, and this original story happened months before, so at this point, it's been like 6 months when she shared this with me. And within a few days of sharing the story inside my group, this woman messaged me and said, "You'll never believe this, but he apologized. He came up and he talked about it and offered me sincere apologies, and I feel really good about it, and everything is now better." And I thought, oh my God, I had never even considered that as a possibility. And I kept thinking that the best I can hope for is to alarm the women in my community and just have their ears up. Just look out. Look out. Something is being said about this person. Just be on guard. Watch out for other people. Watch out for yourself. But within a few days, he apologized. And I don't know for sure if it had something to do with that. Maybe somebody talked to him from the group. That's possible. In which case, it's an amazing result of just a simple action of women talking together and alerting each other to something. So this dancer apologized, and then I ended up running into him at an event and dancing with him. And with me, he was so different. He was so playful and childlike and innocent that I could never even believe that that was the same person that was described in the email. But that is the reality, that some qualities don't show up for you with a certain person, but they will show up with another. Men are not going to be targeting everyone. If they can feel that there's not any possibility of pouncing on you, they're not going to go for it. I can feel that as a repulsive energy that I put out, that whenever I feel any sort of hint of that kind of energy, I am able to very quickly draw that line. But that's something that came with time, after many, many times not doing that and going for the other. So it's important to know that you have support, that you can be heard, that you have other women who can support you. And for those of us who've been through the ringer, it's important to pass that on, to help other women. There's more of us than men anyway. So we need to take care of each other. That's the whole point of this banter that's been going on forever, is that we can support each other in a way that empowers all of us and reduces the number of these really unnecessarily painful and immature, a lot of times, traumatic experiences within communities where people end up feeling very used and taken advantage of. And of course, this episode is heavily addressed to women, but I know, gentlemen, you are out there listening. Many of you are the most humble, noble servants of this cause, and you have stepped up in your own community to respect women and to help women and to watch out. And I commend you for that. And I don't want to sound like this is some sort of a male bashing session. It's more of acknowledging that men and women within Tango, within that sensual space, we have different growths to go through. And we as women have work to do. We just do. We have work to do for ourselves so that we find that backbone and we find the respect that we offer ourselves first, that then will be mirrored by other people. Ultimately, of course, I think this can be a path to self-empowerment. This is how I'm treating it. I'm not treating it as a battle or to right the wrongs and overcome and conquer. I'm really treating this as an opportunity for self-empowerment, and this is available for both men and women. I guess in terms of men, there can be someone else whose voice can guide them. I don't think I need to be that person to tell men what to do. Men have their own wisdom and they have their own way of doing things. But for women, I definitely want to encourage us to be optimistic, to feel that we do have a lot of power in claiming and drawing boundaries and claiming the space and crafting an environment within Tango that really serves us, women. We can do that. And guess what? That's what men want too. Men actually do want women to be empowered, even if they don't know it. They do. Because everything works better. Everything works better when the community is filled with empowered, strong women. That's just a fact. So I hope this banter gives you some food for thought and inspires you to look for opportunities to practice your own power, practice your own self-respect, as well as look for other people, look for other women who can be inspiring guides and inspiring support for you on your tango journey. I always love hearing from you, so please share your comments with me. You can reach me on social media or join my Facebook group. Thanks so much for joining. I look forward to bantering with you again next week. Until then,